Hello and welcome to the Time and Place, the Gospel Conversation Show, where we discuss faith on the fringes and try to apply God's Word to God's world. My name is Julian. We're solo today again from the home studio, aka my bedroom. Today we'll have a guest to discuss church planting part 2. So let's bring him on. My personal elder pastor, Jon Paul Dennison, the man who married me and my wife. How's it going, brother?
Good. How are you, bro?
Doing good.
Good.
So we had Carl on. It's been like a month already. To talk about church planting, and his setup was a little different because he's not leaving the city. You guys are actually going
Mm,
out. So
we
why don't you
are.
tell a little bit about your background and what inspired you to want to plant somewhere else?
Yeah. Yeah. As far as my background goes, I became a believer a little later in life. I was 21, wasn't raised in the church, and was invited to church by a friend, actually a mutual friend of mine and Carl's, who you just mentioned, and heard the gospel really for the first time with ears to hear it, eyes to see. Um, when I was 21. That was like in '03. So it's been almost years now, so half ago. But, had the opportunity because it was a small church to be discipled by the pastor of that church, Jim McCracken, who is Michael McCracken's father, the lead pastor of our church. He, uh, Jim discipled me and because Carl just got saved around the same time. And for the first time started understanding well the world very differently. Saw myself as a sinner, and really was brought to faith in Christ and hope that was much different than the things I was setting my hope on before. So it's God used that time to basically really bring me to a place that I really believe that this was everything in life now, and felt a call to ministry probably 5 or 6 years into being saved.
That's pretty quick. That's not actually very long. Usually it's uh the way I don't know the traditionally it was there's a lot of were you in college already? You were already because you were out of college already, yeah?
I was in college
In college,
at the
okay.
time, so some computer science. But yeah, I mean, I guess it is different if you don't grow up in the church and come into later in life. Maybe something about that calling happening sooner after becoming a believer. Yeah, absolutely. At 5 years in, I certainly didn't feel fully equipped to do much of anything in ministry, but got many opportunities to do things that stretched me way beyond I felt like I was ready for. And
Mm.
looking back, I think it's a really, really good thing.
So with that in mind, I think you've said before you've been at AARC longer than anyone not named McCracken. But recently, within the past 2 years or so, you've had this kind of pull to church plant and start a new congregation. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the idea of church planting when we rented in 2011 with Gold, Melanie, and Carl, and Ashley, some other people. Church planting was definitely a thing we got to experience. Yeah, we did have a core and we did have some established ministry for sure, but a lot of things were very new and different. So, um, the call to plant again, or the desire to plant again, really came out of a lot of different things, but one of them was going back to my hometown where I went to school. It was a super small town, 800 people. And
Ooh.
yeah, after getting saved, I graduated like 23, so that's actually kind of close to your. Didn't you went to a small school, right?
Yeah, I think
Graduation, right?
we might have been numbers might have been the same. You might have had more
Yeah,
actually.
that's crazy. But yeah, like as far as the town goes, it's small. Once I got saved, just knowing people there, I went back and preached at the Baptist church a few times over years, and to see that church landscape and they would just have a pastor in and out every 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
And it was one single pastor, didn't have elders. And then what I knew about the other churches in the area, just generally not, you know, just biblically driven. And even of some of the peripheral that I saw going on with people who were kind of taking spirituality into their own hand, doing their own thing, was very disordered. And so I had a burden for kind of the idea of small churches, small towns without healthy churches. And that began to go over the years.
So you've been out to Brownwood a couple of times now. What's the church landscape out there? Is it like a single church town? Is there more than one?
No, it is bigger, certainly
Okay.
bigger than what I grew up in. It's about 20,000
Okay.
or so. So not big, but certainly has many churches. I think probably it could have up to 50 churches. I'm not
Oh, wow.
100% sure, but I mean, again, you're talking about you know, probably a dozen of those at least are um, you know, pretty traditional Baptist churches. You have some Pentecostal churches, some AE church, Assemblies of God churches, and some Roman Catholic churches and things like that. But um, there are none that are outwardly, explicitly Reformed Baptist, at least in the way that I think about it. There are a few that have some general Reformed leanings, but again, not a lot. And so the theology that I've grown to believe over the years, and that the other guys are planting with us believe and hold too deeply, is not there. At least we haven't seen it there.
So what's the demographic look like in that town? I know Carl's moving basically to the middle of the city. So he's in the hot spot of like the young, diverse, I want to say woke crowd. Has that stuff hit over there yet? Or is it still pretty like what you'd expect?
It's probably about 20 years away. No, it is in a lot of ways very opposite of that. So it is Bible Belt. So everyone, like even as we've been looking at houses, everyone has all sorts of like uh, versions of spirituality on the walls. And I mean, I don't want to say everyone's a confessing Christian because that's certainly not true, but it is definitely very traditional evangelical light Christianity mixed with a heavy leaning towards conservative politics.
Okay.
And again, I don't know the fullness of that landscape yet, but I've talked to some people. I've met with a couple people that are part of like Baptist organizations, and I met with the dean of the Christian college there. Met with another guy who was part of one of the networks of that has like 50 or 60 Baptist churches, and it seems as though his comment was that they have not had church plants in a long time. They've had maybe one in the past 5 years, and that he's aware of that like made it and is still alive. And but it's very traditional. It's very traditional and conservative. It's actually, and I'm not sure what this means exactly, but they claim to be like the first um, constitutional city in the U.S., which I don't know exactly what all that means, but I think it has something to do with the fact that if their interpretation of what's going on at a federal level or maybe even a state level, I'm not sure, is unconstitutional, that they're not buying it.
Wow.
So I think that's good in some ways, but also not good in some ways.
Right. And looking at it, I almost feel like Carl got the easier assignment. 'Cause, you know, where he's going, everybody is aware that they're not a Christian. Like they're open about it, aware, and there's no convincing them that, you know, they've broken God's law or that his wrath is, you know, that's all. They're like, yeah, proudly. But where you're going,
Yeah.
everybody is pretty tied into the fact that, like, well, of course we're Christians.
That's right. Yeah, it's going to be very different. Yeah, it's going to be very different than that. But um, from what I've seen and heard in some of the sermons I've listened to in the church landscape, um, I do think there's um, a truer biblical message to be taught and
Mm,
preached and lived out among those people. And I think that the gospel is going to do its work wherever
mm.
it goes, for sure. But but you're right. It is that's going to be the challenge, I believe, as well.
And from your own experience, like you said, coming from a small town, not being saved until you were already in your 20s,
Mhm.
did that change the way you looked at small town life? Like once you had that switch, once you had that flip to actually have spiritual eyes, did you start to look at all the Christian things in small town and think maybe they're not as Christian as we thought they were?
Yeah, for sure. Uh, it's interesting because I kind of was between the city and the small town because my dad, was still in the city when my parents divorced, and so I'd be in the city during the summers a lot of times, and then go back to the small town. But
Mm.
in the small town, I was the city boy, and in the in the city here in San Antonio, I was like the country kid. And so, but to your question, I mean. Uh, Yes, definitely. There was a form of Christianity that obviously wasn't super appealing to me when I was in high school
Mhm.
anyway, because I just viewed Christians as, like people that weren't having much fun, or even sometimes people that weren't like the smartest people in the world.
Mhm.
And so definitely after being saved and reading some theologians, like I've definitely changed my opinion on that. But but I think there are some people I look back on that probably shared the gospel with me, planted some seeds, and that are super wise, and I've actually reached out to a few
Mm.
times from my hometown that I know were faithful believers in the area. And yeah, were super wise. They weren't world wouldn't think a whole lot of them, but I certainly do. So,
Mm. So you've been there a few times. You said you've heard a couple of sermons and kind of got a read on the town. Have you met with
mhm.
other pastors that have already been in the area for a while?
Not really. I did recently meet with one who
Okay.
now is he's kind of part of the a Baptist organization there, and I'm hoping to meet one guy Carl knows. But yeah, that's something I definitely want to do. I've been uh, recently in the last year or so, probably 10 or 12 times,
Okay.
but usually for a couple days at a time. And so
Right.
that's kind of one thing I'll try to do, and I think um, through the college that will be more possible as well. Just meeting people in that world. Uh, but yeah, I do. I want to build relationships in that way, and just kind of see where everyone is and how we can in some ways work together. We know that we're not going to be able to work with every church, obviously, or every
Mm.
type of church, but to have some relationships with some of the guys who've been doing the work there for a long time would be helpful.
The college thing is interesting because that Doug Wilson has that same situation where they're kind of in a nowhere town, but there's a big college there. They're by an even bigger one, University of Idaho.
Okay.
So they have that
Mhm.
weird. It's a small town, but it is like as progressive as it gets. What's
Mm.
the university like over there?
So the university is it's a Baptist organization. It's part of the General Baptist of Texas. That's their
Mm,
denominational tie. So not necessarily to the SBC, although I think they were
right.
SBC at one point.
Okay.
But but it was started in the late 1800s. And when you walk, it's a smaller college, like probably 2,000 people.
Hmm.
But when you walk down like the aisles, or even outside, all the banners, every banner has like a different scripture on it, so that
Mm,
there seems to be a heavier actual Christian influence of the college. I was actually, when I was there, I was waiting to meet with the dean, and one of the tours went by me, and they were talking about different things. And I think every student has to go to chapel once a week, which so that's part of their curriculum.
hmm.
So they're a little more serious. They're an actual Christian college, I would say.
Right.
But I, I don't know how theologically intensive they are.
Mm.
I don't think it's going to be like a master's seminary
Right. Right. Right.
or something that's as theologically dense necessarily. But yeah.
I went to, I know you did too, to Dallas
Mhm.
Baptist.
Yeah.
I was on campus for the short time that I was there, and it was
Uh-huh.
kind of the same setup. We had, mandatory chapel service. You'd have to scan your
Mhm.
ID when you went to make sure you went so many times.
Yeah.
Um, when you were a freshman, you had mandatory community service and all that kind of stuff. And I had a weird, I don't want to say weird, but I mean, it was just a town too. I really didn't like Dallas as a town, but there's kind of it was really the first time I really experienced like the American gospel, I guess, in a real full sense of like of just a veneer of
Mm,
Christianity. Like, oh well, this
mhm.
person's a pastor's kid, so make sure you don't mention that they're going here with us or that they're doing this or doing that because we don't want their dad to find out. Stuff
Mhm.
like that. So
Yeah.
it's I feel like Christian colleges are maybe an unfocused missionary field.
Mm.
I think everybody assumes that when you go to private Christian university that you're just like, well, you're all in, obviously. And most of the time I don't think that's true.
Man, yeah, certainly. It seemed like there were about as many people in the classes that I took that were just kind of going to get a different type of education than a
Mm,
ministry education. But yeah, I mean, one thing that I've really come to have a conviction of is the idea of theological training through the local church. So like
mm,
church as seminary. And I know that's hard, like but but I think the church is the only organization that God intrinsically has promised to protect from
mm,
theological drift because it has I mean, at least it's been given the proper ecclesiology, the sacraments, just the word, and just by God's design. I think God designed the church to be the thing that the gates of hell won't prevail against,
mm,
that won't fall. And so the schools, I mean, Harvard, Yale, all the first American schools, all theologically drifted, and I think every school has that certainly possibility, but most of them have that tendency.
mhm,
And I don't know how you stop it if that's not the institution that God built. I do think they can be helpful in training us, and they have even maybe their God ordained place in some sense, but ultimately they're not. Unless, I mean, if you replace a board of elders with the board of education and pastors with teachers,
right.
like you never know where that thing's going to go eventually.
I remember on campus, we actually had two different professors of philosophy that
Okay.
had two different viewpoints on philosophy, I guess. One whose class I took was Professor Noggle, and he was of the presuppositional persuasion. Like
Uh-huh.
every philosophy you have to filter it through the Bible. That's the worldview. That's how we look at everything. And there was
Yeah.
another professor who I never got his name, but he believed that no, you have to take it based on what they believed and what they were saying. That's the only way to properly understand and apply it. So you have to kind of
Mm,
enter it neutrally. And I just thought
mm,
it was interesting that both of those perspectives were both considered equally valid at a private Christian university. I
mm.
just didn't understand that at all. And it was actually in my American literature class was the first place that I ever heard kind of woke race-based
Really?
philosophy ever. Yeah, it was at
Wow.
Christian campus. So
Yeah, that's sad.
yeah, it was really it was mind-blowing to hear them talking about it. But
Yeah.
so I mean, going why that town specifically? Because it is kind of a like I put in the title. Most people probably don't know. Most people in Texas probably don't know where Brownwood, Texas is.
Yeah. So kind of through circumstance, we've been praying about it for years, and I actually went to a high school reunion at the other town I was telling you about, the town I went to high school in, obviously, but one of my classmates, who was a really good friend of mine in high school, who's been a believer longer than me, um, was he was moving to the area with his wife. He was a pilot in the Marines, and then now he's a pilot for American Airlines. But we talked for a few hours that day about just what I was expressing to you earlier about how our town, the theological landscape, and these small towns in the area, these places that we went and played sports at, we knew about because we drove through them all the time. And he asked me the question after we'd had that conversation. He texted me like a couple weeks later and was like, "Have you ever considered planting in Brownwood? We've been researching the area. We there's no churches we'd feel comfortable with going to, and over the years, over the last few years at the church we've been at in Weatherford, which is like Fort Worth area, we have seen church planting play itself out several times and have a passion for that. And that was for me something that I started praying about. My wife and I started praying about, and things began to fall into place a little more than we would have naturally expected. It's certainly not a town that you look at and you want to move to. I would rather, I mean, if it was just the quality of life in the city, I would rather be here. I love San Antonio. I've been here a lot of my life. But I don't mind living in a small town either. I've had that experience, and you still eat food and have relationships, and you breathe the same air. Um, but, but yeah, I mean, it's different. It's a different world. And so we definitely know it's going to be a change in life for our children. And
Mm.
so, but the way God worked these things is similar into how other things in our life have fallen into place and worked out whenever God seems to be moving us in a particular direction. So,
Mm.
and especially with our church here, I mean, again, yeah, we've been here. I talk about how this is the only church I've ever been a member of, and being a pastor here now for 10 years, or 11, 12. It's hard, for sure. And I don't know that the full weight of it's sunk in, but it is more and more. So, but we're certainly excited. It's bittersweet all the way around.
Mm. Now, on the subject of just church planting in general, it's not something that I've seen play out a whole lot. I remember growing up in a Southern Baptist church, there was a lot of missionaries. I think we had 3 or 4 just from our congregation that were in
Yeah.
foreign countries, but I never saw a lot of local or even like state church planting. And
Mhm.
the area you're going to specifically, it's kind of interesting that there's not more because it's right by, not right by, but in the general vicinity of like the village, which is a huge congregation, right? With so big they have
Oh,
multiple meetings and satellite campuses and all that.
yeah,
You would think something like that is just ripe with like, you go start one, you go start one, you go start one. Why do you think
right.
church planting isn't a big thing in the modern church?
Um, yeah, I don't know statistically what those numbers are exactly, but I think if you see some of the statistics, it's scary. I mean, most church plants fail, so we're fully
Mm.
aware of that possibility and reality. Um, I think the nature of a church sending out is just difficult dynamically, because a sending church has to, most sending churches are going to lose members. They're going to give money to support the planters, like is the case in our case and in Carl's
Mhm.
case. So two at once, that's even tougher in a lot of
Mm.
ways. Um, and just the idea of, yeah, from the sending church's perspective, it's difficult, but it's exciting. I mean, it's like, I think, bro, we're in the same, missional community, small group,
Right.
and we have over the years talked about, multiplying at times, and at times have been in spots where we could do that, but people get hesitant when that happens, and change is hard. And so, especially like with what Carl's doing, even probably more than what we're doing, Carl and families that are going, it's tough, and it's tough to go from an established church where everything's kind of in place, and you've got, what you can expect on a Sunday or throughout the week.
Right.
Processes have been developed, and people are responsible for those processes. And you're going into something where there's a lot of people that have to be biblically entrepreneurial.
Mm,
There aren't as many established ways, rules, liturgies,
mm,
traditions, all of that stuff, and so that stuff's kind of um, being formed, which is exciting, but also you don't have it, so there's not a lot to fall back on.
That's an interesting thing to point out, that there's not. I guess in the old days, when I'm thinking of missionaries or church plants or whatever, if they were Presbyterian, like, you knew what that meant, or if they were Baptist, you knew what that meant. But
Right.
now it's really not. If you walk into a church, you don't really know what to expect.
Hmm. Yeah. And bro, that speaks to, like, the Southern Baptist Convention, or some of the big organizations, which are great in a lot of ways, but their process, and they've had some theological. I mean, like,
Mm,
those things are going to happen even more than, or not maybe more, but like as it happens in schools, even in a church, in a parachurch organization, or a denomination. Um, Obviously, that can happen as well, but like for the SC, when, like, the pattern of going to school and then taking one of those pastors and then just being called by a church, like being hired by a church to
mhm,
come in and fill a spot and do what that you know search team asks you to do, is just very different in my mind than what church planting
mm,
in the sending church type of way, multiplication of churches type of way, does. Um, and so there is both um, a level of autonomy that the new church is going to have, but obviously they're getting so much of their theological convictions from what's been developed in them from the sending church over the years. You know what
mm,
I mean?
mhm.
And so they're not completely, autonomous from a theological standpoint, but maybe in their governance they might be. But when I think of, us being sent out by ARCC, like, it's just it is different than what you see in most churches that restart, and I really think the church sending um, people from itself has to be the most biblically consistent pattern we see. I think you see that from Jerusalem to Antioch, and then
Mm.
even beyond.
That's when I think about that, I think it's hard to. I mean, personally, I don't know what the call to be a pastor feels like. I'm not, I'm not. But I got to imagine there's a lot of people who maybe have the inclination or ignore the call. Maybe they just
Mm,
don't want to move, don't want to be in charge of a congregation, don't want to deal with the headaches, don't want to start. I mean, is there a with you guys, I think you just kind of got thrown into it, right? There wasn't really a lot of option. How do you kind of I don't want to say weed out, but how do you find that in your congregation? How do you find, like, oh, well, this person clearly has a gift of leadership. This person
mm.
clearly has a pastoral calling. Like, where do you look for that? How do you find that?
Yeah, I think the first place, you just start with all the explicit biblical commands were given. So, like, let's take elders, which I believe is synonymous with pastors and overseers in Scripture. Those three words. Um, uh, it's I mean, Timothy and Titus give, like, very clear. They have to desire it, like you said. They
Mm,
do have to desire that. But then beyond that, they have to be able to teach. They have to, and then they have these characters and qualities of their life that have been proven over time. It says don't lay hands quickly on them. But generally speaking, I think the safest way, or the most biblical way to do it, is to go, who are the men in our congregation that meet these qualifications, and that desire this, that can teach. And there's always going to be that little threshold to where Um, so much of what happens in Scripture is God calls us beyond what we're presently equipped for. There's an equipping process, but
Hmm.
He's going to call us to step out in faith in different ways that we don't feel ready for. And so there's going to be that in everyone, to some degree. And so until fully officially shepherding, with after hands have been laid on you, it's gonna be a little different than kind of the unofficial type of shepherding that you do naturally leading up to that,
Mm.
because of the way you're viewed, because of the officialization. And I think there's a good and right reason why Scripture makes that official distinction. It's the church is going, yes, we see this in this person. This is formal. This is this it's and same for deacons, although with some different qualifications. Yes, people casually serve from time to time, but to be like a deacon of the church of, with hands laid upon you, is, to be a servant of that church officially, formally, in that formal capacity, is, for your life to match these qualities, for it to be
Mm.
proven, and then for the church to say you are a servant of the church, and maybe in this particular area.
Mm. Have you guys talked about? I know it's still kind of loose in the planning, but kind of a liturgy or what you think it might look like going in?
Yeah, we actually met, two of us met this morning, and we're talking about some of that. Um, not outrageously different from what we're doing now,
Mm.
but there will be, singing for sure, preaching for sure, and we're thinking of doing communion every week,
Mm-hmm.
although also maybe in a setting that's more, meal driven.
Okay.
But we were talking, this morning, and we have talked for a few weeks about the possibility of doing communion at different parts of the service. Maybe it's sometimes at
Mm.
the beginning of the service with a small, teaching from one of our pastors, on it, or if the text that's being preached that week is more driven towards remembrance of the death of Christ, then putting it at the end of the service, things like that. Um, but uh, but and then just in terms of the the teaching rotation, I'm going to be prepped, to teach as many weeks as I need to, but also one of our other pastors is, planning on teaching once a month,
Mm.
to start, and our hope is that, all of our pastors will be teaching from from the pulpit, moving forward, and again, just as that picture of plurality. And again, our congregation doesn't necessarily need to hear from me every week, and we believe that people can teach, who aren't elders. We think we see that, and even Stephen preaches. He's a deacon clearly in Jerusalem, and he speaks. um, and so we believe there's room for people who aren't, uh, ordained, hands laid upon elders, to teach as well. But you do want to know, that what they're teaching is sound. So
Mm. Now, Carl was talking about the obstacle of finding a building.
yeah.
Again, I know it's a little different because he's moving into a population dense area. They're really not going to build or anything there. It's kind of what do we have to work with?
Mhm.
What has y'all's search for a building look like over there? How are people? One, how are people receptive to a new church coming in? And two, how are they
Uh-huh.
receptive to letting you use their stuff while you're there?
Right. Yeah, I mean, since most of the churches have been there for a long time, almost every church that we're aware of has a building.
Hmm.
There are a few meeting in temporary locations, but most of them just have buildings. So, um, we have looked at a few hotels, a few, schools, the university, and there's an old Episcopal church that we looked at. It's probably going to be a little out of our price range to
Hmm.
start. Um, but as of right now, there's a stage theater that has called us back. We actually have a meeting with them next week. We've, talked and asked questions, and they've asked questions of us. Um, we're praying that works. It's a great setup. It has the space we need to do the things we would do, and just would be, and like when you say equipment and stuff, we're thinking, and they've actually offered, if it works out, for us to use some of their equipment, or maybe all of
Mm,
it that's already there. So that would be incredible, having set up every Sunday morning
right.
for a
Yeah.
long time.
Right.
So, but generally, man, it's a weird deal looking for a place to meet. Even here, we moved 10
Mhm.
years or 10 times in the first like 6 or 7 years at ARCC, which is nuts. Um, and it's hard to throw money at people. You would think people would want, a few $100s a week, or a few $1,000s a week for you to meet for 4 or 5 hours on a Sunday. But I understand, like, there's liability, and they have their setup the way they like it, and they want to know
Mhm.
that that's not going to be interfered with. So that's one of the things we try to, you know help them understand, is that, yeah, we don't want to make this a mess. We don't want to come in and change a whole lot of stuff, but we're willing to spend money. We're going to have um, to meet. So
Mm.
we're hoping that works out. We're hoping we'll know in the next few weeks, because that'll really allow us to start planning some things that we haven't been able to yet.
Mm. Now, I know you've been there a few times for a couple of days, and usually, you're taking care of business and stuff while you're over there trying to get everything going. Have you got to interact with the people a lot at all in the town, or even a few? And what are they? I know we joke that they're like 20 years behind, but what are they like? Are they plugged into what's going on now, or are they kind of in their own bubble?
Um, Man, um, it's a type of country. Like, when I say country, it's the country. There's a
Hmm.
few types of country. There's like rodeo country. There's like farming country,
Right.
and then there's like, this is a different type from both of that. They certainly have that type of stuff.
Hmm.
There's agriculturalism, and they rodeo, but it's more of like a uh, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it's just like a being okay with things kind of just not being very nice. um, there are parts of the city that are very poor, but man, like, things just, it's not beautiful.
Mm.
If anything, it has its own beauty. It has to be like a New Mexico beauty or something like that, but not even that. But it's, people are generally just um okay with the way their life is.
Mm.
There's not a lot of ambition,
Mm.
outside of a few little pockets. And so I think that's one of the things that, as much as just going back, or going to a different place, a new place, that's one of the things um, that scares me a little bit, is that it's hard to get volunteers at a church in the
Mm.
seventh biggest city in the U.S., where everybody's got their own thing that they're excited about and moving forward on. And so I hope the apathy of life that seems to be reflected just externally, and like with literally the way people, bro, I ordered, like, we ordered fried chicken one from like Golden Chick, or one of those restaurants,
Mhm.
Bro, I sat there after I ordered for at least an hour, and just, they were high school kids, but they were just
No rush at
not,
all.
no rush, no apology. And so I'm like, okay, I've got to learn a new level of patience. Kind of, so,
That's great. I can't picture that. That's so foreign to any kind of
bro,
concept of
yeah,
anything we do here.
yeah.
So not a lot of Postmates or Uber Eats, or nobody's getting you quick over there.
I'm hoping Amazon gets things in a few days.
Man, that's nuts. So I mean, how are they receptive to you guys coming in? Did you talk to anybody about when you're looking at houses or anything, what you're planning, and how do they kind of feel about
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, we definitely did. Almost everybody that we've met with, whether it be like, yeah, the realtors, or people that we're looking at, uh, you know just looking at spaces and all that. Obviously, we're telling them that, but um, I think there's somewhat of an excitement, for for new, I think people are excited. It is a growing town. So like there's a
Mm.
brand new Chick-fil-A that there's a brand new or a pretty new Starbucks. Um, there are new retail establishments that big cities have, or at least medium-sized cities have, that are moving in, and I think people like that. I mean, there's a level of probably just general consumerism that people
Mm.
appreciate about that. And so in the same way, I think they can get excited about the idea of a new church,
Mm.
but without knowing a lot of what type of church we are. Our hope is to do some form of advertising with some keywords that would attract some people that already share some of the same theological convictions that we do, for a core
Right.
team. So we're gonna put something out that says, uh, Reformed Baptist, if you're
Mm.
interested in being part of a Reformed Baptist church plant, or and I don't even think I've actually used that phrase to a few people. I don't that's not what they describe as, is even different. So
Okay.
than what will be. So
Mm.
um, so it's going to be a challenge, I think. But again, God, has ways of just providing what we need when we need it. So we're
Mm.
trusting that.
Yeah, it's gonna be a switch, and I can tell that already. And they don't have a
Yeah,
target, so I don't know how you're gonna function as a middle class American.
I
No
know,
tar-
right? I know. As a soccer mom.
What's interesting, and it kind of blows my mind. We went to Waco this past week. We were in Waco, and
Uh-huh.
I stopped by the Branch Davidian compound because I had to see it,
Okay.
right? So we
Is it
drove
like a
out there.
museum at this point, or?
Yes, but here's what's weird about it. It has an active congregation still meeting there.
Oh,
So they
and
built a new chapel over the ruins of the compound, and from what I can tell, they're still Branch Davidians.
wow,
So
that's
they still
bold.
hold to, yeah, whatever he was preaching or teaching, they still hold to that kind of idea. There's a little like visitor center when you get there, and nobody was there because it wasn't a Saturday, but um when you get there, it says that a donation will get you a DVD that can give you new insights, both political and spiritually, into the incident that happened.
Interesting. Yeah.
So they're still building off of that, and they're kind of in
Wow.
the middle of nowhere. It's you got to go a ways out of Waco, which Waco's already
Okay.
nowhere, but you got to go past that to get to that little spot. Um, but I thought it was interesting that there's still those little pockets of cult activity all over. And I know in San Antonio it's everywhere, which it still blows my mind that there's so many churches and also so many Mormon wards or Jehovah's Witness
Hmm.
meeting houses, and sometimes on the same street, which I don't know how that happens, but it does. Is
Yeah.
there any of that where you're going? Have you run into any Mormon congregations or Jehovah's Witnesses or anything at all?
Right. I'm not sure if there is a Mormon congregation. That's one thing. I haven't seen one in all the
Okay.
in the churches we've researched, but yeah, they might have a tough time in that city. But there definitely are Pentecostal churches and
Okay.
Assemblies of God churches. So
Mm,
that was a higher number than I certainly expected. So I
mm.
think there will be some of those leanings for sure. Um, but but yeah, it's definitely Protestant driven
Okay.
overall for sure.
Not a lot of, was there I don't know what you call them, the local Catholic stuff over there? Was there a diocese, I guess? Do they fall under anybody?
I don't think so. Well, actually, the church we looked at was Episcopal, so that was different. It
Okay.
was owned by the Fort Worth diocese,
Mm,
but I'm not sure. I mean, I know there's Catholic churches over there, but I'm not sure if there's how much of a hub they are for that.
mm. We're gonna have to go out there and see it because it just
Yeah.
I'm not able to put together in my head what this situation is like. I mean, even
Yeah.
like in at DBU, it was in between the Potter's house and the Village, like those
Okay.
giant mega churches, and then there was a bunch of
Yeah.
smaller churches around. I've never
Okay.
seen a small town like that where it's just a few churches that all kind of lean one direction, and everybody kind of thinks the same and feels the same, and life is just a certain way in that town. That's so different.
Yeah. I think it's red. It's if the Republican if the Republican Party, if your denomination can it can get behind the Republican Party. It's there. I feel like.
Well,
So
that's good. I mean, that's going to be a challenge, really. Do you have to get past the generic Republican Christian, um, I don't know, ideas, and just kind of penetrate like, well, actually, no, that's not biblically accurate. That's not actually Christian to think that way or do that or whatever.
yeah, and it's just like it's hard to say that. It's hard to say, like, yeah, I've never like how do I tell people like I've never voted for a Democrat my entire life. Um, but republicanism is not the kingdom of God. So
Right.
hopefully it's had its impact on the kingdom. But or the kingdom has had its impact on it, rather,
Right.
I mean to say, but yeah, it's not the kingdom.
I saw a video today that I thought was interesting, and interesting for the wrong reasons. It was an Instagram reel where this girl was basically saying that nations can't be Christian or not Christian because nations are not people. So for the idea of it was basically that, like, we don't need to be a Christian nation, we just need to be faithful Christians in the nation, and this idea of like conquering the nation for Jesus is not a thing that we need to actually worry about. And I don't know how you hold that idea when you read Psalm 2 and it's like, ask of me and I'll give you the nations for your inheritance.
Mm,
Like that's the language, and he's talking about giant
mm,
groups of people in different countries, or and when you Old Testament is nation, New Testament is Gentiles. That idea of like saving
uh-huh.
whole places and whole populations. Um, I don't know. I don't know where we picked that up along the way, but that seemed very weird for somebody to just say that. Like, don't worry about converting whole nations. Just be
Mm,
Christian where you are, and that's enough.
because mm. Yeah, and I mean, I think we've even talked about that a bit, but yeah, you're just the nuance of your eschatology is going to play into that, and even how you speak about that's gonna drive how you think about it, right? Like,
Right.
but you're right. Like, yeah, I mean, um, in one sense, nations are made from people and made up of people, and that language in Scripture, there's that overlap of there's the idea of the institution of the thing, whether it's a nation or a city or whatever, and then there's the people that make it up and come in and out of it, and then the rulers who are in some authority of it, and so I think um, that's why eschatology is in church history has been such a difficult thing
Hmm.
for um, Orthodox Christians to come to full
Hmm.
agreement on.
So, are you guys drafting a statement of faith as of now that you're just going to put out there so everybody kind of knows up front what they're getting into?
Yeah, we have finished our bylaws and we've just submitted those, which include our all our doctrinal statements as
Mm,
well as like our ecclesiology and even a few positional things that we wanted to take a position on, like
mm,
what we believe about marriage and gender and all that kind of
mm,
stuff. But uh, doctrinally, much of it is going to be carried over from, I did a lot of the language for ARCC, and so I asked our elders if I was able to carry most of that over, and so I'm going to carry most of that over. We made one or two little tiny tweaks that didn't really make much theological difference,
mm.
especially on all the issues of orthodoxy. It would
Right.
be exactly the same, and even in our distinctives, we are we're pretty much in the same spot as ARCC, and so um, you know between the three of us who will be the elders, myself and the two other guys who we plan to ordain, um, theologically we're very, very close, and then there were two major issues, or not major, minor issues, but two issues that there was any gap
Mm,
um, between, and things like women deacons,
mhm.
things like continuationism, cessationism. Like,
Right.
we took a long time to write like statement after statement to like, okay, do we all agree with this? Do we all agree with this? And I do think, coming back to eschatology, I do think that we have one in each of the major millennial camps, but in it, all three with covenant understandings.
Right.
But yeah, so that'll be fun when it's a thing.
Yeah,
But
when you get to Matthew 24 Revelation on Sundays.
yeah, I know.
You're gonna have to
So
alternate what year who gets to teach their eschatology.
yeah, exactly. So
Cool. Well,
anyway,
for anybody who either may be in the area, moving to the area, or just interested in what you're doing, do you guys have a website? Do you have anywhere we can get info and all that?
we do. Yeah. The name of the church is Brownwood Church. I don't know how we got that name, but it was available. And pretty generic, but brownwood.church is the website. We have kind of a shell site up right now. We'll add more content to it. But yeah, and then anytime anyone's in the area, we're hoping to launch in August 7th. We're hoping to be our launch Sunday. We're trying to solidify that date. But yeah, if you're in the Brownwood area and want to stop by on a Sunday morning or any other time, and meet with us, we would love to have you. So
Cool. And what's the closest big city you guys are to in that area?
I think Fort Worth is 2 hours away. So it's Fort Worth. It's right in the center of Texas. So Fort Worth is 2 hours. Abilene is an hour, a little over an hour, and then San Antonio, we're 3 hours away here. So
okay, cool. Well, JP, thanks for being on. We appreciate it. I'm going to put you down in the corner for a minute, and then we'll get it going. Cool. So church planning part 2, different and unique challenges coming from that. But if you guys could all send your prayers with them, that would be greatly appreciated. Before we log off for today, I just wanted to talk about something that just happened within the past couple hours. The golden boy of free speech at the moment, Elon Musk, has officially bought Twitter. It is officially his. It is a private company again. It is no longer public. And everyone is thinking this is going to be the return of free speech to the platform. We'll see how that goes. We'll see how that plays out. It's definitely interesting. And funnily enough, it all started because of the Babylon Bee. That was the last straw for him. When they banned the Babylon Bee over their joke, he got in touch with them and asked them if that's actually what happened. When they said yes, he said he might have to buy the company to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. And now he has. So 2 thoughts on that. I was listening to a video from Pastor Toby Sumter out in Moscow, and he was talking about knowing the difference between allies and co-agitators as members of the kingdom. And I think that's an important distinction that in modern political thought and tribalism, we've kind of lost. So going forward, we need to understand that all of these companies, all of these entities, all of these people or media personalities who are part of the free speech, constitutional rights, America First, whatever you want to call it, populist movement, they may be co-agitators, but they are not allies. They're still part of another kingdom. They're not submitted to Christ. They're not part of the elect as of now, as far as was revealed now, unless something changes. As clever as Ben Shapiro is, as smart as he is, as logical and articulate as he is, he still believes that Jesus was just another political criminal who died like a bunch of other Jews who led revolts before. And he doesn't believe there's anything special about him. As far as I know, he doesn't believe there's anything actually supernatural in the Bible. He says it can all be explained by natural causes, which begs the question, then why do you keep kosher if you believe that it's all just natural? I don't understand why you would hold to a religion that you don't believe in. But Elon Musk is the same way. As far as I know, he's just another naturalistic materialist. He might have weird simulation theory ideas, which, on the side, simulation theory is just creationism for atheists. So remember that. But anyways, remember that they are co-agitators. They're kicking at all the right people, but they're not allies. We're not part of the same kingdom. The flip side to that is that if free speech is coming back to the platform, now is the time to do whatever you want to do. There's never been a better time to get a message out, to utilize the tools that you have. We had Darren Doan on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about how media companies, media conglomerates, big media, movies, TV, all that's dead. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, podcast, that's the future. So if you can, and at this point, pretty much anybody can, this is like a $40 microphone. Get what you need, do what you can, and get the word out on the kingdom, spread the kingdom in every medium possible until they make it impossible to do so, and then do it anyway. So just our thoughts on Elon buying Twitter. We'll see how that plays out. It's going to be super interesting in the coming weeks. People are freaking out. There might be changes to the platform. You might get more characters. There might be more ways to get verified. It's going to be nuts. And the election is going to be super interesting with Twitter now open. I think the reason we have the president we do right now is in large part due to Twitter and the kind of interference they were running. So we'll see how all that plays out. Until next time, thank our guest, Jon Paul, for being on. If you guys know anybody who's participating in a church plant, or if you guys are curious about it, maybe shoot an email over here and get some advice, find out what's going on. Until next time, this has been the time and the place. We'll see you guys. Peace.